The briefing room smelled like cold coffee and recycled air, the same as every briefing room on every ship Mara Vasquez had ever stepped inside. She supposed that was intentional. Familiarity as sedative. Keep the negotiators calm. She wasn't calm. She stood at the viewport while the rest of the delegation found their seats behind her, watching the Veth homeworld fill the glass like a slow bruise spreading across the black. It was a beautiful planet in the way that a lightning storm was beautiful, all wrong colors, all wrong rhythms, the clouds moving in spirals instead of bands, as though the atmosphere itself had never decided on a direction and had simply given up trying. Ochre and deep violet and a red so dark it was nearly brown. Nothing about it looked welcoming. Nothing about it had ever been meant to. Ambassador Vasquez, Lieutenant Oren's voice came from behind her. The Veth signal confirms the approach corridor is open. We have clearance. She didn't turn around. What's the atmospheric composition at the landing site? Breathable barely. Oxygen-nitrogen mix with elevated sulfur dioxide. You'll want the filters. She pressed 2 fingers against the cold glass. On the other side, 70 million kilometers away, a world that had been trying to kill humanity for 11 years continued not caring that she existed. 11 years. She'd been 26 when the first Veth ships appeared at the edge of the solar system, hanging there for 18 days before anyone managed to establish contact. She'd been 27 when the first colony on Kepler 452b went dark. 28 when the war began in earnest, not with a declaration but with a sound, a low, resonant frequency broadcast on every known communication band simultaneously, a tone that turned out to be neither greeting nor warning, but the Veth equivalent of a door closing. She was 37 now, and every year of the war lived behind her eyes. 10 minutes to descent, Oren said. Ambassador. Mara turned from the viewport. She was not a tall woman, and the formal negotiation blacks made her look narrower than she was, all sharp lines and pale hands. Her hair was pulled back in the way she wore it when she needed to be sharp, tight enough to hurt a little, just enough to keep her present. She'd learned that trick from her mother, who had been a surgeon, who had believed that the body could remind the mind of where it was when the mind started to drift toward where it feared to go. Her mother had died at Kepler 452b, in the silence before the door closed. Let's go, Mara said. The shuttle entered the Veth atmosphere at a descent angle that the autopilot had calculated and Mara had not overridden, which was the extent of her trust in this mission. The calculations, not the mission itself. The mission was what you did when trust had run out and something had to fill the space where it used to be. In the seat beside her, Dr. Erlenko reviewed his notes on a handheld screen. He was the xenolinguist, 43, soft-spoken, the kind of man who could spend 6 hours arguing about the grammatical structure of a single Veth vocalization and emerge from it refreshed. She had worked with him for 2 years. She trusted him the way she trusted the autopilot, completely within a defined set of parameters and not at all beyond them. Across the aisle, Colonel Jin Park sat with his hands flat on his knees, watching nothing. He was her security detail and her backup negotiator, in that order. He had a scar along his jaw from the Third Battle of Proxima, and a habit of going very still when he was thinking, so still that sometimes Mara had to watch his chest to confirm he was breathing. The shuttle bucked in the upper atmosphere. Outside, the ochre clouds swallowed the viewport whole. First contact delegation in Earth history, Ko said, not looking up from his screen. Technically. We've had contact for 11 years, Park said. We've had war for 11 years. This is the first time they've asked to talk. Ko paused. Distinction matters, linguistically. Linguistically, Park said, in the flat tone of a man who had stopped finding academics charming sometime around the Battle of Proxima. Mara looked at the back of the pilot's headrest and said nothing. She was thinking about the briefing from Admiral Chen, 3 days ago, in a room that smelled like cold coffee and recycled air. They chose you specifically, Chen had said. The Veth transmission named you. Your designation, your rank, your mission record. They have intelligence on you, Vasquez. Detailed intelligence. That's either very good or very bad. What do you think? She'd asked. Chen had paused too long before answering. I think it's the only offer we've gotten in 11 years, he said, and I think you're going. She'd known she was going before he'd said it. She'd known she was going when she saw her own name in the transmission text, rendered in the Veth glyph script that Ko had spent 4 years translating into something approximating meaning. Her name, surrounded by other words she hadn't asked Ko to translate immediately, because she hadn't wanted to know what they said until she had to. She'd asked him on the second day of their transit. He'd been quiet for a long moment. Then he'd said, "They say you sing while you work." The landing site was a plain. Flat black rock worn smooth by wind and time, ringed on 3 sides by formations that Ko called crystalline and Park called something else under his breath. They rose 50 meters, transparent, refracting the dim red light of the Veth sun into scattered bands across the ground. It would have been beautiful if it hadn't been so perfectly constructed. The formations were not natural. Nothing on this plane was natural. The Veth had made it specifically for this meeting, had shaped a space from raw stone in the time between their transmission and the delegation's arrival, which meant either they had been planning for this meeting long before they announced it, or they could reshape kilometers of rock in 9 days, and Mara wasn't sure which answer frightened her more. She stepped out of the shuttle onto black stone and felt it under her boots, solid and cold even through the soles. The atmospheric filters sat snug against her nose and mouth, tasting faintly of plastic. The sulfur dioxide would take the edge off everything else. She had been told to expect mild sensory distortion. She had been told a lot of things. The Veth were waiting. There were 7 of them at the center of the plane, and Mara stopped when she first saw them. Stopped and just stood there for a moment that she would not later tell Chen about, because the moment contained fear, unguarded fear, the kind that doesn't announce itself but simply arrives, and she had promised herself she would be past it by now. She wasn't past it. The Veth were tall. The word did not do adequate work. They averaged nearly 3 meters, built on a bilateral symmetry that rhymed with human anatomy without quite matching it, 2 primary limbs below, 2 above, a thorax that moved when they breathed in a way no human ribcage moved, expanding laterally as well as forward. Their heads were elongated, the eyes set wide and low, 8 of them arranged in a shallow arc, deep violet in color, faintly luminescent. Their skin, if it was skin, was the same ochre as the clouds, patterned in dark striations that shifted fractionally when they moved, like the grain of wood does when the angle of light changes. The central Veth was larger than the others. Not taller, larger in some way that was harder to quantify. A density, a presence. The 6 others were arranged around her. Ko had used the feminine pronoun for the Veth designation she carried, which was the closest grammatical analog, though the concept was not precisely gender, in a formation that was not quite a military arrangement and not quite a ceremonial one, but contained elements of both. A structure that said, "She is the one who matters here, everything else is context." The Queen. The Veth had no word for queen. Ko had explained this 4 times in 4 different ways, and each time the explanation arrived at the same place. The concept that the human language pointed at with that word was approximately what the Veth were pointing at with theirs, except that the Veth concept also contained echoes of architect, and memory, and first voice, which was a Veth phrase that meant something like the one from whom all other sounds learned how to exist. First voice. Mara walked forward. Protocol called for Ko to speak first. That was the plan. Ko would deliver the formal opening address in Veth, the careful construction of intent and goodwill that he had spent 6 months composing, calibrated for the specific phonemic register that Veth communication required when opening a channel that had been closed. The plan had been built on the assumption that the Veth would wait for it, that they would observe the human practice of allowing the designated speaker to speak first. The Queen did not wait. She made a sound. Mara had heard Veth vocalization in recordings. Everyone had, by now, the broadcasts that had come with the war and the scattered communications that the linguists had managed to capture and analyze over 11 years. She knew what Veth sounded like. She thought she knew. She was wrong. The recordings had been dead things compared to this. The Queen's voice came from somewhere in the thorax and traveled through the air with a physicality that Mara could feel at the base of her sternum, a layered thing, harmonics running beneath and above the primary frequency, the way a chord on a pipe organ fills a room not with a single note, but with the architecture of a note. It was not a word exactly in the opening phrase. It was something smaller and more precise than a word. It was a sound that contained information the way a photograph contains information, compressed, spatial, requiring a specific faculty to decode. Beside Mara, Ko went very still. Then he said quietly without turning his head, "She said your name." "I heard my name in the transmission text." "That's not your formal designation," Ko said. "Your name, the shortened form, the one people use when they are not being formal. How do they know you're—" He stopped. Then carefully, "She says she has heard you. She says she recognizes the shape of your breath." "The shape of your breath." Mara stood very still on black stone 50 light-years from Earth, and felt the hairs on her arms rise under the fabric of her uniform. "Ko," she said, "what does she mean?" Ko was listening. The Queen had continued to speak, or to sound, because the categories were not quite clean, and Ko's eyes moved in the way they did when he was working, tracking something invisible. He had a habit, when processing Veth, of moving his lips almost imperceptibly, as though trying on the sounds to understand them. "She says," Ko paused, then slower, "she says she has been listening to the human frequencies for a long time, not the military channels, the older ones, the ones that travel without purpose." He looked at Mara. "She means radio, the old broadcasts, light-speed transmissions. They would have been reaching Veth space for decades before first contact." Mara understood radio astronomy. She understood that every signal humanity had ever broadcast expanded outward at the speed of light in an ever-growing sphere through the galaxy. She understood that the Veth, wherever they had been when those signals first reached them, would have heard everything. She had not, until this moment, understood what everything meant. "She says she heard a voice," Ko said, "many years before the war, a human voice singing, and then the same voice again recently, in the mission recordings that were captured during the Battle of Cygnus Station." He was speaking very carefully now, the way he spoke when the translation mattered more than the speed. "She says the voice is the same. She says she has been listening to it for," he looked at his screen, cross-referencing, 31 years. The sulfur dioxide pressed faintly against the filters. The red light scattered through the crystal formations and laid itself across the black stone in fragmented bands. Mara's mother had sung while she worked. In the recordings of the Kepler mission, before the silence, there were hours of footage of the colony's chief medical officer moving through the prefab med bay with the low background murmur of a woman who sang to herself without noticing she was doing it. Old songs. Songs her own mother had taught her. Songs that had traveled outward at the speed of light. And Mara, who had grown up in her mother's surgery, who had learned medicine before she learned negotiation, who had spent 11 years working mission after mission in the silence that her mother's death had made of the world, Mara sang when she worked. She had always sung when she worked. She had never thought about it. It was not a choice. It was a way of being present in a room when the room was difficult. Her mother's trick, her mother's inheritance, passed down not as lesson but as habit through proximity and years. The Battle of Cygnus Station had lasted 9 hours. Mara had worked the field hospital section of the command deck for all 9 of them. She had sung the whole time. "Ko," Mara said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. "Tell me what she's saying now." Ko listened. His expression was doing something complicated. "She says," he stopped, started again. "She says the voice in the first recording, the older one from the early broadcast, stopped. She says there was a period of silence in that voice. She says she understood, when she studied the pattern of human vocal communication across the recordings, that silence in a voice that has always sung means." He paused again. "She says in her language the concept is something like, the one who taught the sound has gone ahead. The one who taught the sound has gone ahead." Park beside Mara made a small sound, not a word, the kind of sound that means a person has understood something and does not have language for it yet. "She knew about my mother," Mara said. "Not by name," Ko said. "But she understood that a voice she had been following went silent, and a different voice. The same voice, the daughter of the voice. She says she can hear the similarity. She spent years analyzing it, took up where the first one left off." He looked up from the screen at Mara. His eyes were wet. He was not a man who cried often or easily, and the fact that he was close to it now told Mara something about the weight of what he was translating. "She says she has been waiting for this voice to come to her. She says," his voice broke slightly and he steadied it, "she says she has been afraid the war would end the singing before she could hear it from close range." The Veth Queen was looking at Mara. All 8 eyes, faintly luminescent, arranged in their shallow arc, looking at Mara Vasquez, 37 years old, negotiator, daughter of a woman who had sung in the dark. Mara looked back. It took 4 hours to establish the formal framework for conversation. Ko worked with a speed and precision that Mara had never seen from him before. The Queen had a secondary voice, softer and higher, that she used when addressing Ko directly, and Ko responded in carefully structured Veth that he had been preparing for months and had believed he might never use. The 2 of them found a rhythm, and Mara let them find it, standing back and watching and reading the space the way she had been trained to read it. The positions of the 6 attendants, the way the Queen's striations shifted when certain subjects were raised, the moments when the communication seemed to carry weight versus the moments when it seemed to be navigating weight. She was building a map. This was what negotiation was at its core, not the words. The words were the surface. The negotiation was the map you built of the other person's interior landscape, where the hard ground was, where the soft places were, where the underground water ran. The hard ground you worked around. The soft places you approached carefully. The underground water you followed to its source, because the source was always where the real conversation was. The Queen wanted the war to end. That was the obvious thing. Obvious from the fact of this meeting, obvious from the fact that the Veth had initiated it, obvious from everything Ko had translated. But obvious things in negotiation were not always true things. They were sometimes the story being told to make the less obvious thing easier to achieve. Mara had learned that lesson on her 3rd assignment, 17 missions ago, at a conference table on Titan, where 2 factions that both claimed to want peace had spent 2 days constructing the most elaborate argument against peace she had ever witnessed from people who were not consciously aware they were making it. She watched the Queen. The striations on the Queen's skin shifted when the word war appeared in the translation stream, shifted in a specific direction, a lateral contraction. Ko had noted it in his field work. It was, he believed, the Veth equivalent of a wince. Not shame, exactly. Not grief. Something that was the sensation of touching something sharp that you had not expected to find sharp. Surprise pain. The war had surprised her. That was interesting. Ko, Mara said, during a pause in the formal exchange, when Ko was reviewing his notes, and the Queen was consulting with one of her attendants in a register too low for the recording equipment to capture cleanly. Ask her what she understood the door-closing signal to mean. Ko looked up. The initial broadcast. The one that started. The one that started the war, yes. Ko considered this. That's a significant departure from the prepared agenda. I know. Admiral Chen's protocol requires. I know what the protocol requires, Dr. Ko. She said it without heat. Ask her anyway. Ko was quiet for a moment. Then he turned to the Queen and spoke. The Queen's response was immediate and sharp, her striations shifting in a broad lateral wave that moved from her thorax to the upper edge of her primary limbs, a shudder that Mara could see cross her body like a breath taken too fast. Ko translated slowly, as though each word was a stone he was placing carefully. She says, he paused, she says the broadcast was not a closing. She says the word in her language that the broadcast contained is complex. He looked at his screen. The closest translation she has offered is an acknowledgement of the arrival of something significant, the way you might, he stopped again, worked through it, the way you might hold very still when something rare and unexpected comes near, so as not to frighten it away. The crystal formation scattered red light across the black stone. Mara stood very still. She thought she was being quiet, Mara said. Ko looked at her, yes. And we heard the silence and called it a threat. Oh yes. 11 years. 11 years, and 43,000 dead at Kepler 452b alone, and the silence at the center of Mara's life that no amount of work had ever been able to fill. And all of it, built on the same misunderstanding that two people make when one of them is trying not to frighten the other, and the other one does not know that. Mara breathed through the filters, tasted plastic and sulfur. Tell her, she said carefully, that I understand. Tell her that humans also become still when something arrives that they are afraid will leave. Ko translated. The Queen looked at Mara for a long moment. Then she made a sound that Ko did not immediately translate, because it was not in any of his reference databases. A sound that was low and layered and precise, harmonics moving through the air like a chord from something vast and old, and Mara stood there receiving it and feeling it at the base of her sternum the way she had felt it the first time, except that now she understood something she hadn't understood then. The Veth had first voice, the one from whom all other sounds learned how to exist. Humans had the same thing, every one of them. A first voice from which all their own sounds had learned to exist. A mother's voice, or a father's voice, or an older sibling's voice, or whoever had been there first and had shaped the silence into something bearable. The Queen knew about first voices. She had been tracking one for 31 years. She had heard it go silent and heard the next voice take up where it had left off, and she had been afraid the war would end that voice before she could hear it from close range. She'd been afraid. Ko, Mara said, what did she just say? Ko's voice was very quiet. She said, you sound like what I was afraid I would never be allowed to hear again. The formal session resumed. Ko and the Queen navigated the structural machinery of peace negotiations, ceasefire terms, prisoner exchange protocols, the demarcation of contested stellar territories, the establishment of communication frameworks that could function reliably enough to catch misunderstandings before they became incursions. It was slow work. It was meticulous work. Ko was extraordinary at it, and the Queen, it became clear, had prepared with a thoroughness that matched his own. She had what appeared to be a dedicated linguistic team of her own in the form of 2 of her 6 attendants, who communicated with her in a continuous quiet subregister that Mara's equipment was not equipped to monitor. Mara participated in the formal session as her role required, asking questions when the terms required clarification, offering counterproposals when the territorial frameworks needed adjustment, watching the striations, and reading the map of the Queen's interior landscape with the focused attention she gave to all negotiations and the particular intensity she gave to this one. But the formal session was not where the real negotiation was happening. The real negotiation was happening in the spaces between. In the moments when Ko paused to review his notes, and the Queen turned her array of eyes toward Mara and simply looked. In the moment, 4 hours into the session, when one of the attendants brought a container of something, and the Queen gestured toward Mara's team in what Ko quickly identified as an offering posture. And Mara, without consulting the protocol document on her handheld, without asking Park, without doing any of the things she was supposed to do before accepting anything from an alien species in the field, accepted it, and held it, and didn't drink from it but held it. Which Ko would later tell her was the correct response, the Veth equivalent of accepting a glass at someone's table and holding it while the toast was made. She hadn't known that. She'd guessed. She'd guessed based on the map she was building, the underground water, the soft places. The Queen's striations had moved when she held the container, inward this time, a gathering motion. Ko would describe it later as the opposite of a wince, the Veth sensation of something landing where it was meant to land. In the 7th hour, the formal session reached an impasse on the question of the Kepler system. It was not a surprise. The Kepler system was where the war had started, practically speaking, where the first colony had gone dark, where the first Veth incursion in force had occurred, where 43,000 people had died in the first 6 months of a conflict that had then spread outward along every contested frontier. For humanity, Kepler was a wound. For the Veth, Ko had worked hard to establish this, and was still working. Kepler was something that translated roughly as a point of origin, not the origin of the war, the origin of something older, a Veth word that meant, the place where we first understood you were there. Two peoples looking at the same star system, one of them seeing a wound, the other seeing a first glimpse. The session stalled on the question of whether the Kepler system would be neutral ground or ceded to humanity as reparation. The Queen was not moving. Mara's counterproposals were not moving her. The striations were still, which Ko said indicated processing, not refusal, but which Park beside Mara was reading as a wall. She's not going to give ground on Kepler, Park said, very quietly. During a recess the Queen had called for what Ko believed was her equivalent of eating. It means something to them, more than the other systems. I know. If we can't get Kepler in the settlement, Chen is going to. I know what Chen is going to do. Mara stood at the edge of the plain, looking at the crystal formations. The Veth sun had moved. The scattered light now lay across the ground at a different angle. The bands shifted, the red deeper. It was, she thought, getting late by whatever measure of time the Veth used for this plane, for this meeting. She thought about the word that meant, the place where we first understood you were there. She thought about the silence that traveled at the speed of light, carrying everything. The voices, the music, the broadcasts from television programs and radio stations and mission recording logs, every human sound that had ever been made indoors or outdoors or in the cramped prefab quarters of a colony medical bay. She thought about her mother. She thought about what it would mean to be the Veth, to be a species listening from across the dark, to hear a voice singing in the static for the first time and understand, perhaps for the first time, that you were not alone, to hold very still so as not to frighten it away, to watch that voice go silent, and then to hear the daughter's voice take up where it had left off. Park, she said. Yeah. I need you to get me the Kepler mission recordings from the archive unit in the shuttle, all of them, the ones from the medical bay. Park was quiet for a moment. Vasquez, he said. I know. Chen is never going to. I know. If this goes wrong. I know Jin. She used his given name, which she rarely did in the field, and she saw him register it, the small shift in his face, the recalibration. She turned to look at him. Get me the recordings. He went. The Queen returned from her recess with her attendants arranged differently, a subtler formation, less architectural, more gathered. Ko noticed it. He said it indicated a shift in the session's register toward something more interior. Mara noted it and said nothing. She waited until Ko had re-established the formal exchange, and the impasse on Kepler had re-emerged in the conversation, as she'd known it would, because that was where the session's center of gravity had shifted. Then she spoke directly to the Queen. Not through Ko, not in Veth. She had no Veth beyond the 40 words Ko had taught her, and only 3 of those were relevant here. She spoke in English, the language that had traveled at the speed of light, and she said, "I want to show you something." Ko translated. The Queen's eyes moved to Mara. Mara picked up the small audio device Park had brought from the shuttle. She held it up, not activating it yet, just letting the Queen see it. Then she spoke again, and Ko translated, and what she said was, "This is where you first heard me. This is the Kepler mission recording. This is what the system means." She activated the device. The audio was not clean. 11 years of archival storage and the quality of the original recording equipment had given it a hiss, a static texture, the sound of a small room in a prefab medical facility in the early days of a colony. And under the static, the ambient noise of the room, monitors, equipment, the soft sounds of a functional space, and under all of that, barely audible, a woman's voice. Singing. Not performing. Not making music as a deliberate act. Just singing the way Mara did it, the way her mother had done it, a background thing, a presence-keeping thing, a way of filling a room with the knowledge that someone was in it and continuing to be in it and was not afraid. The Queen went very still. Not the stillness of processing, not the stillness of the impasse, the lateral calm of a position held. This was the stillness she had described to Ko 8 hours ago in the planet's equivalent of a briefing. The kind of stillness that means something rare and unexpected has come near, and you do not want to frighten it away. The recording played for 43 seconds before Mara turned it off. The silence afterward had a quality. The Queen's striations moved in a pattern that Mara had not seen before. Not a wince, not a gathering, not any of the movements Ko had catalogued. Something new. Something that moved from the thorax outward and upward, a wave, and then settled, and then moved again. And Ko, watching, made a small sound under his breath that was not a translation, but was the sound of a man understanding something he hadn't understood before. Ko, Mara said. Ko stopped, watched. She's doing something in her language, she's making a sound that is, he listened. The Queen's sound was too low for the recording equipment to catch cleanly, but it was there, felt more than heard, the harmonics moving through the air. It's the Veth form of what you might call holding something carefully, the gesture equivalent. When something is given to you that is precious and you want to demonstrate that you understand its weight. He paused. She's receiving the recording. The way you held the container, she's receiving it. Mara let her breathe. Then she said, carefully, and Ko translated carefully, and the care moved in both directions across the space between two species. My mother sang in that recording. She was the chief medical officer of the Kepler colony. She died when the war began. She paused. The Kepler system is where you first heard her voice. It is also where I lost her. She looked directly at the Queen. I am asking you to understand that the same place can mean grief and wonder at the same time. I am asking you to let us both hold it. Ko translated. The Queen looked at Mara Vasquez for a long time. Then she spoke, and Ko did not translate immediately, because this was longer than a statement, longer than a reply. The Queen spoke for over 2 minutes in a low, layered register, and her attendants were still, and Park was still, and Mara was still, and the red light moved across the black stone in its slow alien way, and the crystal formation scattered it in every direction. And it was, Mara thought distantly, extraordinarily beautiful, if you could hold in your mind at the same time all the things it had cost to be standing in this place. Ko translated. She says, he cleared his throat. She says that her people have a concept for places that mean grief and wonder simultaneously. She says the word translates approximately as a scar that remains luminous. She says such places are considered sacred, not to be owned, to be kept. He paused. She says she did not know that humans understood this concept. She says this changes the question of Kepler. He looked at Mara. She says Kepler should be neither neutral nor seated. She says it should be the first place that both peoples call a scar that remains luminous, a shared sacred ground. His voice was very steady, and he was crying openly now and had stopped bothering to wipe the tears. She says she believes that is what your mother's voice was trying to tell them 31 years ago, that you were there, that you were like them, that you had grief and wonder in the same place. He stopped. Then she says she is glad someone came who could explain. The formal agreement was signed, or rather, the Veth equivalent of signing was performed, which involved both parties placing a hand and a primary limb simultaneously against a recording surface and generating a specific harmonic tone, and Ko spent 20 minutes making sure Mara generated the right tone before the Queen performed her portion. And when it was done, it was as binding as anything Mara had ever signed in a conference room on a ship that smelled like cold coffee. The shuttle lifted off from the black stone plain in the late red light. Mara watched the crystal formations shrink beneath them, and then the ochre clouds swallowed them. And then there was nothing but the upper atmosphere and the pressure of departure, and finally, the clean black of space. Park was asleep within the first hour. He did that, crashed hard after a high-stress situation, as quickly as a switch being flipped. 7 years of military conditioning that allowed him to go from full alert to unconscious with the efficiency of a system that understood it might not get another opportunity soon. Mara envied it sometimes. She had never been able to sleep after a negotiation. Her mind kept working, kept building and rebuilding the map, kept finding the underground water and following it. Ko was not sleeping. He had his screen open and was reviewing his recordings of the session with the focused intensity of a man who understood that he had just done the most important work of his career and needed to understand exactly what had happened so that he could explain it to people who had not been there. After a long time, he said, without looking up, "The striations. I don't have a full taxonomy yet." "No," Mara said. "I have working hypotheses for 12 distinct patterns. The one she did when you played the recording." He paused. "I don't have a category for it yet. I've been trying to cross-reference with the harmonic output data." "What's your working hypothesis?" Ko was quiet for a long moment. "In human terms," he said, "it would be something like," he searched, "when you have been waiting for something for a very long time and it arrives, and the waiting turns out to have been worth it." He looked up. "I don't know if we have a single word for that." "We don't," Mara said. "The Veth do." "What is it?" Ko said the word in Veth, the layered sound of it moving through the shuttle cabin, brief and precise, containing its harmonics in a compact chord. "How does it translate?" Mara asked. Ko thought about it. "Brighter yesterday," he said. Mara looked at him. "It means," he worked it out carefully, "it means all the time before now is brighter because of what just arrived. The past becomes more luminous in retrospect, because what you were waiting for is finally here." He paused. "They use it for reunions, for returns, for moments when something that was feared lost turns out to have been traveling toward you the entire time." Outside the viewport, the Veth star receded behind them. Around them, the long dark full of signals and silence, and the light-speed transmissions of a species that had been talking to the stars without knowing anyone was listening. Mara thought about her mother singing in a prefab medical bay on a colony that no longer existed in the early days before the darkness came. Singing without thinking, the way Mara sang without thinking, the habit of it, the inheritance, the thing that was passed not as lesson but as proximity. She thought about it traveling at the speed of light through the dark. Arriving. She thought about an alien queen, vastly strange and vastly old by any human measure, holding very still so as not to frighten it away. She thought about 11 years. She thought about the cost of a misunderstanding. She thought about what Chen would say when they docked, and the press conference Admiral Chen would hold, and the history books that would eventually, in the way of history books, reduce what had happened on a black stone plane to a paragraph, maybe two. The Vasquez Accord. The Kepler Declaration. Something clean and institutional and entirely unable to carry the actual weight of the afternoon. She thought about her mother. Then she stopped thinking and just sat in the quiet of the shuttle cabin while Park slept and Co worked, and she breathed through the filters that still tasted faintly of plastic and sulfur, and after a while, without noticing she was doing it, she began to sing. The sound was low and without performance, a background thing, a presence-keeping thing. Co looked up from his screen. He didn't say anything. He listened for a moment, and then he went back to his work with the quiet of a man who had been given something and knew enough to hold it carefully. Outside, the dark ran in every direction, and in every direction the signals traveled had been traveling, were still traveling, voices and music, and the ambient noise of rooms where people were working and were not afraid, and somewhere out there, in the directions yet unmapped, who knew what was listening? Who knew what was holding very still? Mara sang her mother's song into the dark and did not stop until she was ready to stop, and then she sat in the quiet for a while, and then she slept. Admiral Chen met them at the docking bay with an expression that had not yet decided what it was. He had a tablet, and a press officer, and 3 people from the Strategic Command who looked like they had not slept in the same number of days she had been gone. "The Kepler clause," he said immediately. He didn't say hello, he never did. "Shared sacred ground," Mara said. "Both peoples. Neither owns it, both keep it." Chen looked at the tablet. "That wasn't in the framework I know. Strategic Command is going to have questions about the precedent for." "I know, Admiral." She was very tired and she was still herself, which was the most she ever asked of difficult days. "The full session recordings are with Co. The translation annotations are extensive. Everything is documented." She paused. "The agreement holds. The Kepler clause is why it holds." Chen looked at her for a long moment. He was 61 years old and had been running this war since he was 50. And the war was, by all measures, over. And what the face of a person looked like, when something they had been running for 11 years stops, was a thing Mara filed away in the map she kept of every person she had ever worked with. Surprise pain with the Veth connotation. Something sharp you had not expected to find sharp. "Good work, Vasquez," Chen said. She nodded. She found her quarters, dropped her kit, sat on the edge of the bunk. The ship's ventilation hummed. She'd need to write the debrief report. Co would need her annotations on at least 14 specific translation decisions. There would be a press conference. There would be meetings. There would be months of follow-up negotiations. The real work of peace being not the agreement but everything that came after it. The sustained, unglamorous labor of people deciding, over and over, to act as though the agreement was real until it became real. She would do all of it. She was good at it. It was what she was for. But first, she opened the archive unit that Park had returned to her, and she found the Kepler mission recording, and she played it in the small silence of her quarters. The static and the hiss, and the ambient sound of a room where someone was working and was present and was not afraid. Her mother's voice. She listened until the recording ended. Then she said very quietly into the empty room, "I think she heard you." She didn't say it to anyone who could respond. She said it the way you say things that need to be said out loud even when there is no one to say them to. The way you keep a voice present in a room by making a sound in it. Her mother's trick. Her mother's inheritance. Outside the viewport, the stars were the same stars they had always been. Every one of them had sent its light across the dark for years before anyone received it. Every one of them was a voice, in the way that a light was a voice, saying only, "I am here, I am here, I am still here." The war was over. Mara Vasquez sat in the small quiet of her quarters on a ship that smelled like cold coffee and recycled air, and she was 37 years old, and her mother was dead, and the Kepler system was a scar that remained luminous, and somewhere 50 light years away, a queen who had waited 31 years for a voice to arrive at close range had by now received the afternoon's recordings, and was probably in her own alien way doing whatever the Veth equivalent was of sitting very still with something precious. The past was brighter than it had been this morning. It would keep getting brighter. That was the deal, Mara thought. That was the only deal with grief, with distance, with the long dark in every direction. You kept going. You kept singing. You let the sound travel as far as it could travel, at whatever speed, and you trusted that somewhere in the directions yet unmapped, something worthy of the sound was listening. You held very still. You did not frighten it away. And eventually, not soon, never as soon as you needed, but eventually, it arrived.